Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about Bloober Team's disquieting cyberpunk horror, Observer. Find out if I appreciated the grim sights it showed me, or if I found myself wishing I could watch something else. You are Daniel Lazarski, a detective working in a cyberpunk-flavored dystopian Poland. Specifically in Observer, which is basically like literal thought police, given they can pluck through the memories of their suspects. Whilst getting ready for the day, you're suddenly contacted by your long-estranged son, leading you to a particularly slummy section of the city. Which, that definition is slightly hard, because a lot of the city looks pretty slummy. But anyways, you go to this section of the city in search of answers and perhaps even the chance of reconciliation. And yet what you're instead faced with is a murder mystery and the growing certainty that something is dreadfully amiss, especially as a sudden lockdown effectively traps you in the building you were investigating. Honestly, it's really hard to give a good summary since there's so many twists and turns in the story, and I'm trying to avoid giving things away, but I found myself hooked right near the start. Thematically, Observer manages to evoke the same sort of feeling from its world building that you might find in William Gibson's Neuromancer or other similar material. Chiron, the corporation which more or less serves as the foundation of this bleak remnant of society, given World War III was more or less implied to have happened, ends up feeling like a distinctly monolithic entity, permeating or at least influencing just about every aspect of the society that's shown within the game, and adding to the overall feeling of disquiet that the game manages to give off as a whole. I also really enjoyed the dialogue in the game, with a few of the sequences and developments along the line actually managing to give me pause. It handles subjects like transhumanism well and provides some altogether interesting moral dilemmas and ideas along the way, even if the choices you ultimately make don't change much at all until the finale. That said, it was a lot of fun to get there, and that's because Observer manages an altogether interesting take on the psychological horror genre. Part of that is because of the large amount of focus it spends on immersing you in its world through your actions, given the game does have a very investigative bent to it. You're a detective, and a good amount of your time spent in this title will be trying to find and piece together clues. Whilst this does play out fairly simply for the most part, there's a lot of optional odds and ends to find both on the various crime scenes you end up stumbling across, as well as just through the apartments as a whole. The game also enjoyed playing around with the fact that Detective Larsky happens to be augmented, and not just by providing different visual types to help hunt down clues. And that's because his implants also require maintenance of sorts in the form of synchronization fluid. To be fair, I never actually ran out of the stuff since I was pretty diligent about hunting down as much as I could, but that didn't stop me from not taking it intentionally just to find out what would happen, and its effects are fairly interesting. In fact, when I was introduced to it near the start of the game, my initial response was to try and fix my visual settings since it results in degraded visuals and glitches, which can really mess with the ability to properly carry out, investigative work or avoiding getting murdered. Still, the simple fact of the matter is that while there are segments of Observer where you'll need to play evasive games of cat and mouse to avoid an enemy lest you be killed, these weren't generally the most unnerving parts for me. By and large, it was during the more quiet segments that Observer spends most of its time and effort messing with the player's head. It builds on those times where there isn't an obvious threat to build tension and ambience, playing with the player's expectations to help instill a certain degree of trepidation. Whilst there are some false starts or jump scares to release that tension, it was the overall uncertainty for how things were going to play out that helped Observer to build its threatening and unnerving atmosphere. Really, I can't actually count the amount of times that I was hiding when I had no real reason to be doing so, if only because the game had somehow managed to rather neatly instill a fear of death in me long before the opportunity to get murdered ever came up. I'm pretty sure the first corpse I encountered was responsible for that, to be fair. And the second also didn't help. Then again, the game's namesake observer sequences, so named because you rather forcibly rummage through someone's memories and observe them, also contributed because not only did it manage to offer some rather curious bits of gameplay and storytelling, they also tended to showcase some rather disquieting events that made the idea of dragging my heels with the investigation sound pretty appealing. I mean, after all, I could spend some time just roaming around the apartment, soaking in some optional investigation and learning more about its denizens, or finding collectibles. I mean, sure, they're creepy trading cards that showcase members of the staff as biologically blighted due to a form of disease that has augmentations rejecting their flesh and causing rapid onset necrosis, but, collectible trading cards and not following on the heels of a murderer. Yay! Moving on, I'm sorry, but I just really like a lot of Observer's design choices when it comes to the audio. Like, for one thing, the voice acting is absolutely delightful and really adds to the noirish element of the game. But well and beyond that, the quality of the music and the ambience is just amazing. Like, it very much managed to elicit the sort of feelings I got from watching OG Blade Runner, providing tracks that literally gave me the chills. I loved it. I love it still even. I was also quite the fan of Observer's visuals. In general, I'd find them to provide an altogether superb and immersive environment to explore. But what was of particular note to me was the manner in which they'd gradually suffered degradation and glitching over time due to your nature as a cybernetically enhanced citizen. If you didn't keep up with your medication, you'd find visual glitches cropping up as you navigated the world, and they can get very distorted if you ignore your meds for a while or get stressed, which was definitely an interesting aspect. That said, for those who are looking for more surreal imagery of the sort that might have been at home in layers of fear or PT, the Observer sequences of the game are apt to be where you get your fix. Each one is vastly different, but the underlying theme to all of them is their unpredictable and altogether personal looks at a distorted world, and take full advantage of some rather disconcerting bits of visual metaphors. So, to boil everything that I just said down to its essential essence, I really enjoyed my time with Observer. Like, I think it genuinely did a great job of establishing a narrative and an immersive, fun way of exploring said story arc. It handles themes which rest at the core of Cyberpunk in a manner that feels well thought out and grimly realistic. Even after I'd put the game down, I found myself mulling over the way it handled things and the character interaction. Partly, I think, because of how it managed to present them in such a delightfully cinematic fashion without placing the game on rails. Admittedly, for a horror game, there is a lot more focus built on the establishment of tension, but I felt this was a good thing rather than leaning on more palpable horrors that lose their edge. Honestly, if I was going to nitpick anything, it'd be the simple fact that the few segments that had decisions, the outcome seemed more for your own personal satisfaction than anything. You make choices, but the long-term outcomes aren't really something you get to bear witness to. Likewise, the last-minute choice for the ending also felt like a missed opportunity for a more long-term build-up, but the overall experience was great. Enough so that Observer warrants being called a critical hit in my book. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or a Monday TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know when there's a new release. There's also a Discord. You can click the link in the banner or the description so you can become a part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editor and to make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description plus the banner for them links. With all that said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.